Hi, I'm Dr. Paul Louis Metzger, and I'm the director of New Wine, New Wineskins. Welcome to New Wine Tastings, where every week we'll have an opportunity to engage people from diverse backgrounds, all in the attempt to build relational bridges through Jesus in contemporary culture. We are desirous of the opportunity to engage in deep and meaningful ways, and we're really thrilled and excited to have you with us. Hello, I'm Paul Louis Metzger, the director of the Institute for Cultural Engagement, New Wine, New Wineskins. And I welcome you to another episode of New Wine Tastings, where we seek to build relational bridges through Jesus in contemporary culture. It's my privilege to introduce to you Jimi Calhoun, a pastor of Bridging Austin in Austin, Texas, and Steve Hanamura, who is the president of Hanamura Consulting. These are longtime friends and ministry partners, and it's just a joy to be with you guys today as we discuss how to develop empathy to engage people in the midst of the coronavirus who are often shut out and shut in our society. So Jimi and Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So we're going to start off with just reflecting on this theme of empathy, and not to shut down, but to really get that empathy generator going in our society today as we seek to have the heart of Christ. And as we reflect upon the heart of Christ and Christ's empathic concern for others, we need to think of those who we hear about in society who are often shut out, as I said earlier, and shut in the midst of this social distancing, physical distancing with the shutdown. And I was struck by an article I read recently, and we'll start with Jimi here. I was struck by an article where it discussed how people in the African-American community, it's not only the African-American community, but many in the African-American community are hit in a sense with the double blow because of historic structures and the like, with a lack of opportunity to get the kind of health care that's needed, whether it's with diabetes, whether it's with heart disease or other matters. It plays a part with the distancing that one might have in advocacy and access to healthcare. There's also suspicion. The article I read said there's suspicion within the African-American community because of such things as Tuskegee and the like. So when you have a history with disease based on historic structures that are often, I'm often clueless about, but those historic structures that lead to inequities, maybe poverty, the article said, comes into play because of, again, those structures that put up walls between people. And we're not always intentional about those things, but those things are often there present because of systemic structures that put up barriers to us. Jimi, can you speak to this issue and add to it from your own vantage point as a pastor and as someone who's been a musician and also someone who engages in a variety of diverse communities?
Well, the first thing I would say is, as you mentioned, social distancing, and I often like to think in terms of spatial distancing, in that I grew up quite a distance away from the suburban area of town that was occupied by primarily whites. And for me to ever go to the good hospitals or the malls or something, I had to cross into another territory, basically. And it's something that people don't think about, being in certain areas that's just familiar to them. They don't think in terms that other people, it's not always that familiar to them. And sometimes it can be challenging to traverse the amount of miles needed to go to access things like healthcare. And another point I would make that you made was about suspicion. Ironically, I just had a physical this week, and my doctor is from India, and she was talking about this and talking about that, and we brought up a couple of points, and then she asked, "Why do you come back so much?" And I said, "Well, doc, it's because I trust you." And it's not so much that I don't trust other doctors who might be white. It's that we have a history of medicine being two-tiered. in that there's a different way of looking at the anatomy and the physiology of white people as opposed to people of an ethnic group. In fact, I put in my latest book that there was a disease that was thought to be endemic just to Black Americans called dysesthopia apiatica. And what that disease, how it manifested itself was in rascality. And it was only Black people that had that. Well, you know, that was kind of an outlier of common practice in medicine, but it was there nonetheless. And so you never know when you're walking into a doctor's office whether you're getting somebody who ascribes to that theory and how they're going to diagnose whatever condition you have. And so there are a lot of challenges that come into play when you're dealing with like something like the coronavirus for different people, because there's a perspective, well, I should say a perception that it is going to be a different kind of challenge for people of different groups.
And, you know, with what you're saying, Jimmy, it just tells me that I need to be more sensitive. And I need to somehow think outside of my own frame of reference, my own experience, to listen well to others so that we can. Let's just say we all want everyone to have accessible, affordable healthcare and the like. Well, let's just say we all want that for everybody. Well, but that doesn't mean everyone has it. And I need to be thinking, what can be done and what can I do to make sure that I'm reaching out in my own limited role, that I'm reaching out, that I'm trying to do what is possible to me to engage people and articulate the issues, even like we're trying to do here, to make us more aware and more empathic on these subjects.
Yeah. Well, also we need to keep in mind that African American people have 1/10 the disposable income of their white counterparts. And when it comes to just a normal checkup or going down and having this procedure, we think we go to the doctor when we have to go to the doctor, when we need to go to the doctor. Looking at medicine in a preventative sense is kind of a luxury. And when you have very little disposable income, you have to pick and choose. Therefore, if you do have problems such as diabetes and high blood pressure, things that can be controlled and maintained, Black people are less apt to have those maladies under control just by sheer nature of not going and having those every 3-month follow-ups, because you have to pick and choose what it is you spend your money on.
That's really striking. And, you know, if we had opportunity, we could talk about inheritance and just, you know, some of the factors that play in there in terms of, you know, going all the way to the slave block, back to the slave block, and, you know, sharecropping and such. When, you know, inheritance plays a part in people having income and disposable income. And if people don't have that built up through the centuries, it plays a role. And I believe Emerson and Smith in their book, Divided by Faith, talks about some of those historic realities that are still with us today in different contexts.
Yeah, if I could add one point there. Just this week, my older brother sent me a picture of our grandfather, our maternal grandfather. He was a pastor in Arkansas. And I remember him holding me and picking me up and pinching my cheeks, things that grandparents like to do to grandkids. And it came to mind that when he did that to me, he had been picked up and had his cheeks pinched by a slave. And so sometimes when we talk of history, it sounds like far off, way back when, and no relevance, and it's not germane today, but it struck me profoundly to think about that I had been held by somebody who had been held by a slave. And what that said to me, it's really not that long ago that institution was in play.
That's a very poignant and impactful point that you're making, Jimmy. And, you know, if we don't understand history, we also repeat it in different ways, as Santayana said. With that in mind, let's go to Steve for his reflections on this. Steve can speak to history as well in the context of his parents' experience and his brother's experience being in an internment camp during World War II. And Steve, you were born shortly thereafter, if I'm not mistaken, and born blind. And we'll get into some of that a bit more as we develop this conversation. But Steve, maybe you could just speak to your own story and your own experience historically and how that's still with us today.
Well, the history, thank you for having me here, Paul, and nice to be with you as well, Jimmy. My history, born in 1944, shortly after World War II, and truthfully, I didn't get the hit as much being Japanese because I was at a boarding school, because there was no place for blind students to attend a regular school. So I was somewhat sheltered, at least up until high school. But my brother and my dad and my mother took hits all the time. It was not uncommon to just be doing normal things like going to the grocery store, going shopping somewhere, and hey, Jap, get out of here. What you do? Go back where you belong. And I was able to escape that part of my life, but being away from home was hard for both of us. And later, I didn't know if I was being discriminated against because I'm Japanese or because I'm blind. And that was a very difficult distinction, and I never knew. And sometimes it was both. If I wanted to go out on a date, the girl might have wanted to go out with me, but the parents wouldn't let them. Other times, even into college, the girls themselves didn't want to go out with me, and Japanese was part of the story. As far as educational purposes, as I said, residential school for the blind, only blind students. There was only one other Japanese person in that school, but then it really hit mixing with African Americans and blind and Japanese at the public high school was pretty wild. You could expect to be called out, and you never knew when it was going to happen.
And Steve, just if you wouldn't mind sharing what you've shared in other contexts about when you were born, the doctor had to come. It was late in the evening, and it was right before midnight. Could you speak to that and how your mom felt about that, and even your blindness, that for her, what she thought the connection was?
Mom was pregnant with me, and the situation you're alluding to, and she was about ready to deliver, but the doctor was 90 years old. He says, I don't deliver on Japs past midnight. So then he pulled me out with forceps. And for a long time, we thought that was the reason why I'm blind. It turned out not to be the case, but for 2 or 3 years, it was believed that because of what the doctor, he wasn't going to let mom get to full term here. I don't work on Japs past midnight. So I came out at 11:58 or something like that, and he pulled me early before she was ready.
Yeah, it's still a very heavy, and just talk about the isolation, just the language that the doctor used and others use.
Yes.
And those are weapons so often. We think about weapons, even with the coronavirus, there's been a lot talked about in terms of quote unquote the Chinese virus. For yourself as an Asian American, when you hear that kind of language, Steve, that kind of terminology, what immediately comes to your mind? Because we're talking about the need for empathy. And language, the words we use can heal or hurt and harm. What comes to your mind when you hear that language of Chinese virus?
A little bit of, I don't get as mad as I used to. I would have gotten really upset. I think it's a stereotype. Stereotypes are very hurtful. They are belief systems that people have, and sometimes people don't even know they have such a stereotype until a comment like that comes out of their mouth. And then they go, and somebody, if you were to call them out on that, say, I'm not prejudiced. Well, what you just did is evidence of your stereotype of how Asians or Chinese. In that context, we're all alike. There's no distinction between Chinese, Japanese, Korean. It's the Chinese virus, and anybody who was of Asian persuasion could seemingly fit under that descriptor. So it's not only the Chinese that will fall prey to such a comment. It could be a Korean, a Vietnamese person, a Japanese person could also be called out having the cause of the Chinese virus. So it's a stereotypic response.
And it does lead to abuse in various contexts.
Oh, totally.
Further abuse, it can lead to harm. And we've come upon reports where this is occurring in our country, where people are lashing out at Asians and Asian Americans, including how it can affect businesses, personal well-being, physical safety, and certainly emotional and mental and spiritual well-being as well.
In our workshops, Paul, I do training workshops, and I will tell people the 4 values that drive workplace behavior are safety, 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 and safety. Physical, political, emotional, and spiritual safety. And until you deal with those and calm that down and move it aside, you can't really move forward, because you don't really know what participants are bringing into the room. Which element of safety are they dealing with before they feel really comfortable to share openly in a seminar or in a class or in the workplace itself?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And just we need to always cultivate contexts of safety, and to really make and help one another see that we are one. For all of our differences from one another, we are one. And I know that's a real passion point for both of you in your pastoral work, in your consulting work, and the like. And when we can cultivate a sense of oneness, there will be safety. Wouldn't you say? There will be safety when there's a sense of oneness. If we don't sense that we're one, I don't think we'll sense much safety. Would you agree with that, Steve?
It's interesting you mentioned the word oneness, because that is the mission of our company. Celebrate oneness. Now, oneness means that you can be different, but we come together as one. And then the other distinction is you don't work towards oneness, you work from oneness. So I come from Beaverton, Oregon. Jimmy's comes from Austin, Texas. But in the posturing of how we behave in the workplace, I work from that position. And when it's not happening, I try to go back in my mind and emotions to get to a place of oneness when things are not working out very well.
Thank you, Steve. And Jimmy, this is something that you and I talk about as well. You know, Steve's company, Hanamura Consulting, is all about oneness. When I call Steve and I get his voicemail system, because he knows it's me, so I have to come up with a new phone number. But when I get his voicemail, it'll say, you know, celebrate oneness. You know, it's that emphasis on oneness. And for you, Jimmy, you know, in your pastoral work and the like, even in your work as a musician, a blues jazz musician over the years, I mean, I just love hearing the stories of what you tell about some of the bands you played with and musicians you engaged as a professional musician yourself. But you talk about the theme of oneness. You know, there's one race of people. And so often we have this social isolation, this social segregation that's really embedded deep in our minds, and we need to break through that. Could you speak to that, Jimmy, please?
Well, I think I can. In that, one of the things I did in my ministry was we lived abroad for 8.5 years in Central America. And during that time, so that meant I was embedded in a culture where I didn't understand just the cultural norms and the signals that were being sent unknowingly by the population, but they would send signals to each other. And I was oblivious to them. And one of the problems we have in our country is certain signals have become normalized. And when a person like me wants to enter into the majority culture, I pick up on signals that I'm not viewed as really being part of. I'm talked around, not talked to in certain instances. And it only takes 2 or 3 of those experiences for me all of a sudden not to feel comfortable. Then I don't want to go back. And one of the things I've noticed over the years that people who look like me, who come from the Caribbean or from Africa, they can come into the culture and they don't, since they're oblivious to the signals being sent to them, they're immune to them. They go ahead and they just charge straight through like they're not happening. And I don't know whether the remedy is for me to inoculate myself in such a fashion and pretend I don't see them or hear them or aware of them, or be sensitive to them and try to help people when they happen to say, you know how that just made me feel? Or do you know what just happened? Are you aware that when you walked to the restaurant, they only talked to you and they didn't make eye contact with me? Those kind of little signals that says you're really not a part of. They happen on a daily basis, and that's something that we need to overcome.
Yes, and I remember you saying to me recently about how you entered was it not a large white church? Maybe you had been uh, attending there or whatever, and there was a Hispanic person with you. He said, "Come on, let's go over and connect with them." And he said he would need a passport. Could you just speak to that issue, because I think it gets at it.
Several years ago, I was working at a church here in in Austin, and it was a large, primarily Anglo white church, and I invited a Latino man to come over and to check out a service. Just met the guitar player, great guitar player, by the way. So I invited him to come over, and he goes, "Where is it?" And I gave him the address. He goes, "Whoo, shoot, man, I'm not going over there." I go, "Why?" He goes, "For me to go over there, I need a passport." And it struck me because I thought about all the times that I traveled all over the globe with a passport and what that meant. That meant I could land, get my guitar off the plane, go in and play music, but I couldn't stay there longer than the 3 or 4 days that I had that work visa. I wasn't really ever allowed, I couldn't speak to what was going on around me because I'm not a citizen, I'm not part of the country. So if something happened to me, I just have to take it. And I thought about all the implications of just being on a visitor visa, what that meant. And he perceived, and it really wasn't that far. It was just on the other side of I-35, which was the racial divide here in Austin. It wasn't that far as the crow flies. But in his mind, because he grew up here, he knew all of the implications of going on that other side of the town. And he thought, well, I certainly need permission to be there.
So when that occurs, it can actually exacerbate the tensions, or when we have a shutdown, so to speak, with the coronavirus, physical isolation, social distancing, that can actually exacerbate the problem that's already present with the need for passports. Because if someone needs a passport, even to get into a church, when we think about all kinds of other factors, that only intensifies the situation. And again, what I'm hoping for is that individuals such as myself, people such as myself, will try as best as we possibly can to put ourselves in other people's shoes. I love the statement from Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird. We've all heard it, but I just keep coming back to it. If you really want to understand someone, you have to step inside their shoes and see life as they see it. And that's required of anyone who seeks to follow Christ, because Christ, in a sense, got outside of his shoes, entered into our shoes as when he became human. And not that we're Christ. I am in need of Christ. It's not that people need me. I need Christ, and we all need one another. But it's more the matter of our Lord through the Spirit exhorts us, encourages us, invites us to really try and put other people's concerns before our own. As we see in Philippians 2, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, and it's assumed, Paul's saying, and you do have that, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility, consider others better than yourselves. And I think, during this time where we all feel isolated, we all feel perhaps set off and shut down in certain respects, through the Spirit, we need to say, Lord, help me to see others. And I see a lot of people seeking to see others. When you go for a walk, a lot of times people will wave in ways that they would never have done before, because we know there's a need for connecting in different ways. But I need to do that all the more, especially with those who are already experiencing in our society being shut out and also shut in. Now, let's speak to that issue of shutting in. And we've had a little technical difficulties with the video screen at points in this conversation, but I'm just so grateful for both of you making time to have this conversation on such a very important issue as this. And as we proceed, if we could try and stay as stationary as we possibly can, because sometimes the video is delaying our movements or delay capturing. So I'm trying to stay as stationary as possible. And it's hard because we're on a subject where we cannot stay stationary. We cannot stay stationary on these issues. We need to move out and connect. And I think of shut-ins. You know, my mom just died in late February. She was 93. And there was some kind of flu coming through their center where she lived, and they were in a sense quarantined, and people couldn't get to her. The only ones who could get to my mom when right before her passing were immediate family members. They wouldn't let anyone else in. And she passed away, and we were able to celebrate her life and grieve the loss of our mom right before they shut everything down. And I've met people who've lost loved ones where they couldn't meet in community to honor that memory of someone who had passed away in this time of the coronavirus pandemic. And you both work with people who are elderly. You work with people with disabilities. You know, Steve said that he's blind from birth. And Steve does a lot of work on ethnicity, gender, disability. He's been a consultant to me at New Wine and an advisor at New Wine. Jimmy, also in your pastoral work and your music work, you do a lot of work with the disability community. And in your most recent book, and you both are authors, and feel free to mention your books as we go, but in your most recent book, you talk about the differently abled, Jimmy. So Steve and Jimmy, could you speak to the issue of what it's like for people who are differently abled, or the disabled community, and also the elderly, what it's like for them during this time of this social distancing? Again, it's exacerbated. This problem of isolation is so often exacerbated in times like this, and how I need to be empathic and to learn and be sensitive and grow. So Steve, could you speak to that, and Jimmy as well, please?
Okay. Well, at our church, Paul, we have 20 to 30 families where there's an individual with a developmental disability. And so we're talking about disabilities like autism, Down syndrome, and the children do not understand why they can't go see their friends. There's no comprehension of COVID-19, isolation. So they are just befuddled. They're driving their parents crazy, because as much as the parents work to explain to them what's happening, they don't understand the social isolation or the reason why. They feel like they're being denied the opportunity to go hang with their friends. So that's very real for people who have some cognitive disabilities. I also want to make a distinction between visible dimensions of disability and invisible dimensions of disability, and they both have their pluses and minuses, and the isolation is different depending on whether you're visibly disabled or whether you have an invisible disability.
And what would be an invisible disability, Steve? Could you speak to that?
ADD. I don't like our middle son has attention deficit disorder, but he looks normal, he functions normal, but then you don't understand why he can't track information as well as other people. He's not stupid, he just can't track intellectually the same way that you would or that I would. That would be, but he looks, quote, normal. He looks like a, white male. He's I'm married to a Caucasian person who had a son before Becky and I came together. And so he's a white male. And that's all you would see, with no notion that he's got a disability. That really did impede his school experience dramatically.
And I've heard about how people with autism face challenges at every turn, but even now, especially now with such things as the coronavirus.
Yes.
Let's say I'm interacting with someone in public, and they look, quote unquote, and I'm putting in quote marks, they look normal, right? They look normal. Of course, they are normal before God, and they should be before me. But I think you get the point. They look normal, but they don't act the way that I expect them to act in some manner. whether it's response mechanisms or certain dynamics that you were alluding to. How would you encourage me, Steve, to again get outside of my normal processing, to think with a new normal lens of inquisitiveness, to not think, oh, there's something wrong with this person. Boy, I need to keep my distance, but maybe I can probe a little bit more or be a little bit more sensitive. How can I grow in that area, Steve?
Well, first of all, go ahead and acknowledge that this doesn't feel normal to me, but then go back up basically. Hi, Steve, how are you? What's happening? What's your day like? Just go to some basic questions. That'll mean more to the individual and the individual's family member than you'll ever know. So just back up, change the things you might talk about, but stay engaged.
So again, simple questions like, how's your day going for you?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. How's your day? What are you doing? Be inquisitive, just ask questions. And boy, this guy's talking to me. I can't believe it. Or at least the parents will say that, or the family member, if they'll see that. At the blind school, we used to count how many sighted people would say hello to us in a day. That meant, wow, maybe I'm okay after all.
Yeah, and that's again poignant. And Jimmy, you had mentioned before about how you can be at a restaurant, right? And and the waiter might talk to the person with you, but not to you. And
yeah.
Would you help someone from the Caribbean or Africa who's just come and they're not picking up on some of those cues that are occurring? Would you help them understand what might be happening, and even to say to the friend that they go out to lunch with, did you notice, or what did you think of that, where the waiter didn't engage you at all or me at all, but only engaged ... engaged you. And I've had that before, for example, where I went out to lunch with a distinguished Christian leader, African-American leader, and a family member of his. If I mention the name, you both would know this individual. He'd come to speak and teach, and two of us were white, and then it was him and his daughter, and they're African-American. And just the way the waitress engaged us, and just assumed certain things with my credit card, like, no problem, yep, got it, so on and so forth. And his daughter said to me, Paul, that would never happen to me. What the waitress just gave you a pass on was something with their credit card, just some of the dynamics with the exchange. Said that wouldn't happen with me. And I remember, because this person was speaking in my class, and we shared that after lunch in the class about just the difference of engagement at the lunch table. One person said, nah, that wasn't race. That wasn't race. A white person whom I appreciate, but just said, nah, it wasn't a racial issue. And I thought, well, maybe it was, at least to just say
the possibility.
Can I at least stretch my mind to think maybe I don't see perfectly clear? And I think, Jimmy, you were getting at that before with, did you notice how the waiter or waitress didn't look? And I just think looking at someone, looking at them eye to eye, and in Japan where I lived, you don't necessarily, to the older generation, look them in the eye out of respect. Right. But here you would look a person in the eye in respect. Jimmy, could you speak to that more too, about just some of the body language we use, even as we engage people with disabilities or alternative abilities?
Now, one of the challenges we have is we say it would be better, we could improve things if people were more educated. And more educated at what? Propositional truths or awareness of incidents that actually happen. But it's really not that so much. How can someone be aware, get educated about something that they're completely oblivious to or unaware it even goes on? As you alluded to, many times when I'll go speak and give examples of something that just happened to a white audience, the hands will go up and there will be all these alternative explanations of an incident that I experienced. And they're not being dismissive. They're not even denying what it is I'm saying, but they're trying to point out to me that from their experience that what I'm saying can't possibly be. or there's a better alternative reason for what just happened. And I'm not really sure what the easy solution is, but I do know one-on-one conversations where you're allowed to share your experience, where people will have an opportunity to hear it, listen, have empathy for it, and believe what you're saying is true, is probably the best way to go. Because when you're in a group situation, people aren't that receptive to anecdotal truths. They're busy trying to find another reason for them. And just yesterday, somebody commented on another video I had done, and a light bulb went on for them. They said, maybe we should listen to the people who are actually affected by racism rather than us sitting in academia postulating and thinking about all these things that are going on. And you're going, this person's well over 50 years old, and they just figured out that it might be a good idea to go to the people who are actually impacted and ask them, how did that feel? What is it that you've experienced? And then after listening, taking them at face value and believing them.
Yeah, that's really important, and it's potent. And I think as we have this time where we're forced to hit the pause button, was in a discussion with James K. Smith and some others recently, where he talked about doing liturgical inventory and the like. And I think that can both be in church and in our lives as a whole, as we go through the seasons of life, and we have to hit the pause button at times with Sabbath rest. And we're in a forced Sabbath, so to speak, in the midst of this coronavirus shutdown. And I think learning to pause, to listen to God and to listen to one another is so, so important. And I try and solve people's problems a lot, like with family. They'll say something to me, and I don't know if I have like an underdog cape on or what. I used to wear that and run around the house when I was a kid all the time. But I don't like my family having problems. I want to take away their problems, and I want to fix problems. But the problem with always trying to fix problems is sometimes I'm not sharing life with people in the midst of the problems. I think to listen is bound up with sharing. It is a form of love to listen, and it's a form of sharing in their lives to listen to. And empathy requires more than what we think of with sympathy. Oh, I feel your pain. No, it's really embracing that struggle as best I can, to be inquisitive, not inquisitional. Now, Jimi and Steve, Jimi, you use music a lot to engage people in the disability community. Could you speak to that? And I just think that's fascinating. I wonder, even for Steve to respond to what you'll share as a diversity consultant, and how music can play such a key role. But how do you use music in terms of building those connections with people in the disability community, just like you do in other contexts of life, Jimi?
Well, actually what happened is that several years ago, I became aware of what I call the invisible minority, because there are people with various disabilities that they're not warehouse, but they live in apartment buildings called group homes. And then during the day, they go to various establishments throughout Austin that are called dayhabs. And they stay there 6 to 7 hours doing various art projects. There might be anywhere from, I think the smallest one we go into is 20 to 25, and then the largest maybe 150. And through a nice series of events, I became aware of it and started seeing one person at a time and became their friend. And so I would bring my guitar down and play, and Sam would sing, and other people in the room would respond. So then I would go to them and play the guitar in front of them and sing, and they would sing. So little by little, I realized that music was not only had an entertainment component, but it was a tool that I could use to make friends with people that I didn't have to share an affinity. Like typically how you make friends is go, oh, are you into fishing? Yeah, well, I'm into fishing. Or are you into books? Yeah, I'm into books. So you have this natural kind of affinity and something, mutual interest, and you build friendships over that. But how do you build friendships with people who are isolated, who spend the majority of their time by themselves, and who may not have developed social skills in the manner in which you're used to? Well, in this instance, I used a guitar. But the takeaway from it was for me that each one of the people that I've come to befriend over the last 8 or 9 years were all desirous of having a friend. But being in isolation, there was no way for them to make friends, because the only friends that they could have would have to come to them. And most of people in the mainstream society are too busy to be aware of those people who are out of sight, and like the old adage, out of sight, out of mind. So I think the lesson that I learned is that there are people who are desirous of being included, and they're desirous of having a friend come in. And in this era, when all of us are restricted, I don't want to say confined, but we're restricted to our homes, we're getting an inkling, a small sampling of what it feels like for the population I'm talking about, day in and day out. That's their reality and will always be their reality. And we know how nice it is when the Amazon truck brings in groceries, or we know how nice it is when somebody rings the doorbell, and even though you have to stay 6 feet away from them, there's human contact for a change. Well, that happens in the day haves as well. And so little by little, I'm bringing in more people, and we're having the opportunity to make friends, to meet friends, I should say, and then make friends with a population that is such dire need of friendship and loving human companionship.
And everyone, I believe, loves music of some kind or another. Music is from the soul, and you've written on this subject in various books. And Steve, also, you use running to get at connection. You know, you're both using points of contact, points of interest in the general population to build solidarity. And Steve, you know, you have this video that I've used in classes where it is hood to coast, Mount Hood to the coast, and you're a leader of a team that you do this like marathon expedition from Mount Hood to the coast, and you're doing team building. And then you also, I've seen videos where you actually help people in terms of being culturally sensitive by way of even allowing them to kind of be your guide, so to speak. And you tried that with me, and it was costly to you, as I accidentally bumped you into not glass ceiling, but a glass door in the hallway at Multnomah Seminary within just a few seconds of starting that. I just wasn't attuned. I wasn't sensitive. I wasn't clued in. Steve, how do you use these tools? Just like Jimmy was talking about, music is a tool to build those connections. How are you using sports and these other aspects to build those connections?
Well, there's some to-dos and some don'ts on how to lead someone who's blind, and you basically teach people how, just drop your arm and I'll grab a hold of you, and as you move on I'll hold your elbow, I can feel the nuances in what you do. I will do exactly what you do. If you push your arm back, that's a signal to get behind you a little more. If you raise your arm up, then it means be ready to step up. Paul, I'd like to take a detour though and go back to the music thing, because there's something I need to share about that. That would fit with, is that okay? Can I do that for a minute?
please.
I also am a singer, and my sole reason for coming to Oregon was to join the Linfield a cappella choir. It was a well-known, renowned choir around the United States, and I didn't get in my first year because I'm blind, and the director was afraid that I would be a burden to my choir mates on tour, getting me to the bathroom, staying in host homes. So I missed my first year at being able to get in the choir, and the students lobbied for me the next year and said, look, we'll take care of him. He can get to the bathroom, but that was the real stop. And then I was also supposed to sing backup to Barry Manilow, and I ran into a problem with his producer. And at that time, I was much more into intense fellowship, I call it. We went into a 20-minute discourse, and I finally was able to talk him into letting me go on stage and practice. And I made it on stage, and therefore was able to participate in the performance. So music is something I dearly love, and initially missed out at my first year at Linfield, but later, the 3 years, I was able to be in the choir, and the director gave me voice lessons. There was a lot of forgiveness I had to learn about too around that, but at least that happened.
So music is good for everyone's soul, and good for building that solidarity. And even though it took you some quote unquote intense fellowship to get there. Other thoughts that you would want to share, Steve and Jimmy, about building connections with those often shut in, whether it's the elderly, the people with disabilities, etc., especially during a time of a global shutdown, so to speak, in that physical social distancing that is often expected of us and required of us in various contexts. Any thoughts you'd want to share as we're moving toward a close to our discussion today?
So someone like yourself, Paul, is huge. You're the ally. You're the connector, because I believe intentional impact. I have to be really intentional to reach out to you, but I'm not going to do that if I'm afraid of disability or I'm afraid of African Americans. I'm going to stay in my own zone. So you play a key role. So to make friends with white allies is crucial, or able-bodied allies, and then from there you help teach other people who may not listen to me, but they will listen to you.
Well, thank you.
I think back to when I met Paul. It was 7-8 years ago at a conference, a multi-ethnic church conference, and I think we were in a booth next to each other or something. And I had a book out, and Paul had a book out, and it was just a little bit of eye contact and a smile, and that was the beginning of a friendship, because there was a sensitivity there. And I could share one anecdote that includes music and as well as disability. And I have a friend in Oregon, in Florida, a great guitar player, is working in a music store, and this woman brought her son in to buy a saxophone. So the gentleman was blind, and so they were in there buying a saxophone, and my friend overheard her talk about there was no place for him to play, and when he would practice, he would bother people and all these things. The guy stopped what he was doing while he was working in the music store and shooed away the other employee and said, "I'll handle this one." So he took it upon himself to handle a transaction of buying the saxophone, which ultimately led to him inviting the saxophone player into his home. And the saxophone player wound up living with my friend for 4.5 years. And now he plays at a church every Sunday. And it was all because he was sensitive. He overheard something going on, and he paid attention to it, and he saw an opportunity for him to do something that he could do. And that was provide an opportunity for this other musician. So once again, it's developing our listening skills and being in tune to what's going on around us wherever we are, because those moments come and they come and go, and they come and go fast. And if we develop the sensitivity and the skill to be willing to listen on a daily basis, I'm sure opportunity always presents itself, whether it's to meet a new African-American friend or a new white friend if you're African-American. If you're willing to listen and hear the heart and not prejudge, and just it goes on from there. So
Thank you, Jimmy. And Steve and Jimmy, I just am rather selfish because I just enjoy hanging out with you all. So that's why I reach out to say, can we do an interview just so I can connect? I mean, seriously, I always am stretched, and I mean it. I really grow through my relationship with the two of you. You encourage me. I gain greater courage and elasticity to reach out further, to engage people. I'm enriched through my friendships with the two of you. Honored to be your friend and ministry partner. Steve and Jimmy, share, just as we're moving toward closing, share a little bit more about your work and what you've written. And if people want to connect with you, how can they connect with you? Could you do that, please? Steve, let's start with you, and then Jimmy.
Well, I wrote 2 books. First one was called In Search of Vision, and it's basically my faith walk. And I give personal and workplace illustrations and how God was with me in the process. The second book is called I Can See Clearly, and it's more for a workplace audience. It's about leadership. I don't talk about my faith, but I talk about each chapter starts with an anecdote, and then there's a point about leadership that we teach in that process.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And how can people connect with you, Steve?
For us, it would be our website, hanamuraconsulting.com. Do we give phone numbers too? Maybe I won't give the phone number.
If you wish to, it's up to you.
Okay, yeah, I could give it. 503-297-8658 is the phone, or hanamuraconsulting.com. Actually, it's sh@hanamuraconsulting.com. That's the email address.
Well, you've never given me those email or phone number addresses before, Steve. No wonder I can't get a hold of you. So I'm just joking. Jimmy, how about you?
Well, I've written 3 books, and the first of which is called The Story of Rhythm and Grace. The second one was The Art of God. And the third one is The Sounds of Love and Grace. And they're all centered around racial reconciliation and loving others unlike yourself. And they all have a music motif, and they're kind of entertaining. There are a few anecdotes and stories, and I tell about my music and my work in the disability community going in, and I introduce some of my friends because they're wonderful. And especially the last book, there's some wonderful friends that I'd like for you to meet, and you can find out about them at Jimi, Jimi, like Hendrix, Calhoun, CALHOUN.com. And, or you can find me at Amazon.com. I have a page there as well.
Wonderful. Well, friends, thank you for joining me at New Wine Tastings to talk about how to move out, not to shut down, but to get that empathy generator going all the more as we respond to Christ's love through the Spirit, and to really consider others better than ourselves, and to really give special attention to those often shut out and shut in, especially during this time. May we continue to grow in sensitivity, empathy, and a real desire to connect. Jimmy, Steve, thank you very much. Paul Louis Metzger, thank you for joining us for New Wine Tastings. It's been a blessing to be with my friends and with you as well.